Hi, I'm Amit Bouri with the Global Impact Investing Network, and I'm here in San Francisco at the GIIN's West Coast Impact Forum. And I'm thrilled to be speaking with Nick Abel from CalSTRS. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Nick, I'm really excited to have this opportunity to speak to you. I'm from California. I've got a lot of teachers in my family, including teachers in California, and so it's a very special coming together of multiple worlds. Before we dive in, I would just love to hear a little bit about your background and what led you to be doing the work that you're doing right now at CalSTRS.
Gosh, that's a big question. If I go back in time, I was born in emerging markets, and I grew up with this unique opportunity of seeing developmental aid, business builders, business doers, and financiers working in different parts of Southeast Asia and continental Africa. And it just always inspired me of thinking, how do we use our skills and talents to make the world a better place, which sounds a little bit cliche. Fast forward about a decade or so later after doing institutional investing and moving around, what brought me to CalSTRS was the opportunity to leverage the platform at CalSTRS to fulfill and secure the mission of managing assets for the retirees of the state of California, while also pursuing investments to have a demonstrable positive contribution to a more sustainable global economy.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I love working with pensions, and the GIIN's been working with pensions all over the world at this point, is this combination of a long-term orientation. So really thinking about how markets need to deliver decades down the line to meet your obligations to your pensioners. Of course, there's this great responsibility with fiduciary duty. And also this responsibility of you're caring for workers. There's an inherent mission as part of these huge investors are really grounded in the needs of the working class and middle class employees that they serve. And we've seen impact investing becoming much more prevalent among pension funds to serve their pensioners. In part because they see this fit with their fiduciary duty, but this need to actually make sure they're delivering a more positive world for their pensioners to retire in. But how do you think about it at CalSTRS?
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe just double tapping on fiduciary duty and investment beliefs. So if you go, and this is all public, if you go online and look at CalSTRS investment beliefs, one of our investment beliefs is the recognition that as a global investor, as a universal owner, effectively into perpetuity on behalf of California state educators, we have a belief that incorporating financially material sustainability considerations into the investment process is a way both to increase alpha and manage risk in an ever-changing world. And part of that's predicated on the belief that the future will increasingly look different than the past. Mm-hmm. Now, to your point about like fiduciary duty and impact, in our portfolio on the sustainable investments team, we don't use the word impact per se, but in our investment policy, it's a dual objective. One is generating commensurate risk-adjusted returns that are opportunistic and additive to the total fund. That's quite vanilla to the fiduciary duty point that you mentioned. The second point, though, is investing in things that have a demonstrable positive contribution. And that's kind of our impact language. And really that's predicated on this idea of we do think you can do good in the real world and generate commensurate risk-adjusted returns. And oftentimes that leads us to places where there's arbitrage opportunities or maybe less understood opportunity sets globally. And so we lean in there.
One of the things that we see is, of course, there's a lot of talk about climate and finance all over the world. Where we've seen from the GIIN's perspective, a real opportunity for us to be very engaged is in the climate solution space. Those like technologies and kind of whether it's energy or land-based strategies that are really important in delivering solutions to many of the kind of industry transitions that we need to make. This is a great place to deliver those positive outcomes. It's a great place for impact investors to apply the rigor and thinking that make impact investors. But when you think about climate solutions, how does that fit into your thinking for CalSTRS, and what are the types of things you're interested in?
Well, it's a great question. I think to answer that, I got to kind of zoom out. So if you zoom out at the total fund level, it's important to note that CalSTRS' commitment to our net zero objective in sourcing and executing climate solutions that fit within each asset class and their risk budgets is coming top down, and deal teams are originating that bottoms up. So the first point I'd want to make is climate solutions at CalSTRS is not just in our portfolio, it's broader, and different teams are tackling that from a bottoms up, different sourcing channel way. In our team, which is an opportunistic private markets portfolio to invest in emerging technologies, the way we're set up is we have a flywheel effect where we invest in early stage technologies. And as those technologies de-risk, we can follow them in their equity journey be on the debt side or be on the infrastructure side. And so that gives us a way to have a diversified approach to climate solutions across private equity, private credit, and infrastructure or infrastructure private equity type transactions. Now, to your point about interesting areas, it's interesting to me when I get asked that question because we often see climate solutions become really diverse globally, to your point. It's not just wind and solar. Things like enhanced geothermal systems in the United States is an area we've been spending a lot of time. Grid modernization technology has been another area that we've been spending time. Things like robotics and using AI and robotics to divert and recycle trash to avoid landfill overuse has been another area that we've been spending a lot of time. And so what we find is there's oftentimes more unique opportunities under the air quotes climate solutions umbrella than just the proverbial wind and solar play, though that's certainly a big component of it.
Well, one of the things I'm also hearing as you describe this is a real opportunity orientation. You're seeing kind of opportunities for new innovations, new market opportunities, things that both help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also have very attractive business models. How do you think about finding the nexus of these different objectives that you're trying to address?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, it always starts with being returns oriented, right? And so we're paid for judgment calls and for pricing risk and managing risk accordingly. And so that's usually the starting point. What we learned from the lessons from the Clean Tech 1.0 period, fast forward to today, is as a house, we tend to not lean into things that are overly reliant on policy, subsidies, single points of failure. Instead, we try and look at solutions that have real world economic value to the end user, not predicated on like a green premium, but just predicated on a real widget or a real service that helps a customer decarbonize and meet a mission or a business objective that they're trying to tackle. And that's the area that we tend to spend a lot of time leaning in.
We're hearing that theme come up a lot, of that there's maybe less willingness to pay a green premium, at least at a systemic level. And of course, you have to drive things change at a systemic level. And so there's a lot more conversation around like, how do you make sure that the value proposition is, that these things are, the most cost-effective way for delivering certain types of services or products. Do you see that theme kind of pulling through your work as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's probably the entirety of our investment focus is thinking on real world solutions with positive unit economics and using that as the opportunity to invest. And I think it's an important point that you raise on systems change. What we have found is as an integrated sustainable investments team, so we have a stewardship team, we have a net zero team, we have an investment team, and then we collaborate within the ecosystem at CalSTRS as a whole. There's oftentimes system change opportunities or policies and practices that you can engage on that sometimes are difficult to invest in.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real nuance and not necessarily a trade-off, but recognizing there's different tools to effectuate change to improve the outcome, ultimately to increase stability in capital markets, to create a rising tide for all boats.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if you mentioned a couple of areas that you're really excited about, and I was wondering if you could just you expand upon one of those a little bit, just to help bring this to life in practice. Because I think when people think about climate solutions, they do tend to think of very narrow ways. It's like electric vehicles and large-scale wind or solar. But as you point out, one of the things that we've been working on at the GIIN is a climate solutions investing framework to really help investors understand the breadth of opportunities, innovations that are out there. Could you bring one to life? What's one that you're really excited about, and kind of how does it work?
Yeah, happy to. And we appreciate the work that GIIN's doing there to try and define a taxonomy. That's a pain point for us that we're increasingly trying to work on, is how do we harmonize frameworks to try and define what is a climate solution, what is what we call like an olive or a smart olive or a transitioning solution or an enabling solution. So we really appreciate the work you all are doing.
Oh, thank you.
On the climate solution side, so one example that we've been spending a bit of time on, this has been in the press, so folks would figure it out, but there's a enhanced geothermal systems business, which effectively, to boil it down, is using fracking technology to drill deeply into, 10,000 feet or so into subsurface, to inject water that ultimately creates steam, and the steam comes back out to spin a turbine to generate carbon-free baseload energy. And that becomes really important when you start thinking about the wake of data centers, AI and power consumption, grid expansion, and the recognition that the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. And so how do you get like carbon-free baseload? There's very few tech solutions. This is one that we like because of the unit economics and the transferability of a large oil and gas industry that has a lot of engineers, a lot of smart people, a lot of incumbent technology that can be pivoted just slightly to pioneer what's now being called enhanced geothermal systems.
That's a great example, because I think we hear a lot about like more diverse energy and making more resilient energy systems, and that I think is taking a whole new direction that I think is really exciting, but certainly is a really interesting type of energy to have in the mix. Just before we close, I'd love to hear kind of looking ahead. If you think about pensions, whether it's CalSTRS or just your peers around the world, Where do you think pensions will be when it comes to climate solutions, but also impact investing or investing for positive outcomes more broadly? Like, where do you see the trend lines going, and what are your expectations and aspirations?
Yeah, that's always a difficult question to answer. I think from our team's perspective, we are hopeful. So part of our mandate is to generate those returns that are additive to the total fund, to secure the retirement for California's educators. The second is to source and secure investments that have a demonstrable positive contribution. And I kind of joke and say the third objective, though it's not in our policy, to wrap it in a bow, is to try and inculcate curiosity and drive change and bring more capital to bear to what we think are interesting opportunities, both to have real world impact and take advantage of mispriced assets where maybe folks don't quite understand the opportunity set, which gives you either investing power or buying power to ultimately back really transformative solutions. So the Nick Abel, maybe not CalSTRS wish list, is that there's more activity in the space, that you see more institutional investors coming into the space, largely based on the recognition that there are unique mispriced opportunities to generate commensurate risk-adjusted returns and fulfill their fiduciary duty while having a positive contribution to the planet and society.
Yeah.
And then just nuts and bolts of our portfolio, and this is all public. We are a team that started investing in private solutions in about 2021. That has continued to grow, and our expectation is to continue to build upon that base over the next couple asset liability studies at CalSTRS.
Yeah. Well, that's incredibly powerful. I mean, I think both to see that you've been at this for a while and you see the trend lines are moving in the right direction, and that you're in a place of expansion. Finding new opportunities, looking for new solutions. Nick, it's been wonderful to have this time with you. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, and thank you, GIIN, for the conference. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks.